In a world where the price of greatness is often measured in sacrifice and sorrow, Eddie Levert's voice rose above it all. From the depths of poverty in Alabama to the heights of global fame, his journey is one of survival, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to his music. But behind every hit song lies a story of unimaginable loss, love, and the strength to keep singing through it all. This is the story of a man who turned pain into purpose, a legacy that continues to inspire with every note he sings. Eddie Levert's voice didn't just carry a generation. It carried the heartbeats of those he loved and the rhythm of a life well lived. Eddie Levert's voice wasn't just a part of music. It was a force that carried the spirit of an entire generation. His voice, powerful and soulful, became the heartbeat of the OJs, a band that defined soul music for decades. Eddie's journey began in Bessemer, Alabama, where he grew up in a family struggling to make ends meet. From the start, his life was filled with hardship, but it was also filled with music, a gift that would later take him to places he never imagined. Starting with humble beginnings, Eddie's early life in Alabama was marked by poverty. His family had little to give, but they gave him faith and the love of music. His voice was the one thing he could rely on. As he grew, so did his talent, and he eventually found himself in Canton, Ohio, chasing a dream that seemed too far away. But no matter where he went, his voice followed, and it soon became clear that this wasn't just any voice. It was a voice that could move hearts, a voice that would define the OJs and shape the sound of soul music forever. The OJs became legends not just for their hits, but for the raw emotion that Eddie poured into every note. Songs like Love Train and Backstabbers became anthems because Eddie's voice didn't just sing, it told stories of struggle, joy, and survival. Behind every lyric, you could feel the weight of his personal journey. His music was a reflection of his life of overcoming adversity, finding hope in the darkest times, and holding on to the things that mattered most. But Eddie's success came at a cost. As much as his voice became a symbol of triumph, it also carried a deeper pain. For all the applause, there was personal loss. The fame and fortune couldn't shield him from the heartbreaks life threw his way. Behind the music, Eddie faced battles that no one saw: the loss of loved ones, the toll of a lifetime of hard work, and the weight of carrying a legacy. His story wasn't just about the fame that came with his music. It was about the resilience it took to keep singing through the pain, to keep going despite the losses that kept piling up. The story of Eddie Levert isn't just about music. It's about how a man can rise, fall, and rise again. How music can heal, but it can't erase the pain that comes with living. Eddie's life and voice are a testament to survival and the power of resilience. But as we dive deeper into his journey, we will discover a truth that goes beyond the stage lights and the songs. It's a truth marked by loss and the sacrifices that come with greatness. Eddie Levert's early life in Bessemer, Alabama, was shaped by struggle and resilience. Born on the 16th of June, 1942, Eddie grew up in a small, poor town where opportunities were scarce and dreams seemed out of reach. His family, like many others in the segregated South, lived in constant hardship. His father worked long hours in the steel mills, while his mother scrubbed floors and washed clothes for others, doing whatever she could to make sure her children had something to eat. Eddie often witnessed the toll that this life took on his parents, especially his mother. Despite the tough circumstances, she always made sure Eddie had what he needed, often going without for herself. "Eat, baby. I'm not hungry," she would say as she handed him the larger portion of a single slice of bread. Eddie knew that she was lying, but that made the hunger even harder to bear. Life in Alabama wasn't just difficult because of poverty. It was also hard because of the harsh realities of racism and the limitations placed on black families during the Jim Crow era. Black children were denied the same opportunities as white children. There were no good schools, and the chances of breaking free from the cycle of poverty were slim. Eddie's classmates would mock him for his worn shoes, saying he would never make it out of the South. Those words stung, but they also pushed him to prove them wrong. Yet, amid the struggles, there was always a sense of hope. The church played a huge role in Eddie's life. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was a sanctuary where Eddie found peace and purpose. His mother, a devout woman, often took him to church where, surrounded by the sounds of gospel music, he began to understand the power of faith and song. In the small, humble Baptist church near his home, Eddie's voice began to rise, not just as a way to escape his circumstances, but as a form of survival. Singing in church was not only a way to express his faith, but it also gave him a sense of belonging. When he sang, he wasn't just a poor boy from Alabama, he was someone who could be seen and heard. It was in that church where Eddie's talent began to grow, and his mother's encouragement, "Sing it like you mean it, Eddie," stayed with him. Though music was his solace, Eddie still had to face the cruel world outside. He had to fight against the barriers set by society, where black children like him were expected to fail. The doors to success weren't just closed, they were locked and bolted. Growing up in the South during the 1940 seconds and 1950 seconds meant that Eddie had to constantly deal with the weight of segregation, racism, and limited opportunity. Dreams seemed impossible, and yet Eddie held on to the belief that he could rise above his circumstances. It was music that gave him a reason to believe that something better awaited him. His relationship with his family was a central part of his survival. His father, despite the hard labor he did in the steel mills, always worked to provide for the family. His mother, who had such a profound influence on Eddie, would teach him life lessons that stayed with him forever. In a time when black families were torn apart by the hardships of life, the Leverts remained strong, their bond formed by love, faith, and music. Eddie's mother made him believe in something greater than the world around him. She made him believe that if he could find his voice, he could survive anything. At the age of 6, Eddie's family made a decision that would change their lives forever. In search of a better future, they left Alabama and headed north to Canton, Ohio, a place that promised work and opportunity. The journey was difficult and uncertain. They traveled by truck, with only what they could carry. The cold, hard road was long and exhausting. They slept at gas stations, sharing food with strangers, and praying their truck would make it another mile. But this was the Great Migration. Black families, like Eddie's, were moving north in search of freedom and dignity, away from the harsh realities of the South. When they arrived in Ohio, the Leverts quickly realized that their struggles weren't over. Canton wasn't the promised land they had hoped for. The winters were bitterly cold, and the work wasn't easy. Eddie's father worked even harder, and his mother continued to clean other people's homes. Despite the harsh conditions, they found a sense of community, and for Eddie, music remained his refuge. But that wasn't enough. The family had to adjust once again. Eddie's shoes were still torn, his stomach still empty, but his voice had become the one thing that set him apart. The challenges Eddie faced in Alabama followed him to Ohio, but in that small town, Eddie would discover something far more valuable than wealth: the strength to keep going, to keep singing, and to keep surviving. At 6 years old, Eddie had no way of knowing that his life would soon take a turn toward greatness. His family had left everything behind, hoping for a better future. But would they find it? The journey was just beginning, and for Eddie, it was the first step toward the legacy that would later define him. The Levert family's journey from Alabama to Ohio was born out of necessity, fueled by the hope for a better life. It wasn't just a move. It was part of the larger migration of African American families escaping the oppressive grip of the Jim Crow South. Like many others during that time, Eddie's family set out with little more than their faith and the hope of finding better opportunities up north. They traveled by truck, their belongings packed in whatever space was left. The road was long and the nights were cold, with little more than the the headlights to guide them through the dark. Every mile was a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they still had to go. The emotional toll of the journey was heavy. The Leverts were leaving behind their familiar world, the only world they had known. The South was where they had struggled, yes, but it was also where they had built their lives, their community, and their faith. Leaving that behind meant not only facing the unknown, but also carrying the weight of all the hardships they had endured. Every step of the journey felt like it was leading them towards something better, but the road ahead was uncertain, and the fear of what lay beyond Alabama's borders was always present. When they arrived in Canton, Ohio, things weren't as easy as they had hoped. The harsh winters hit them hard. Eddie, used to the warmer southern air, now had to endure the biting cold that seemed to freeze everything, from his shoes to his spirit. The steel mills in Canton were a place of employment, but it wasn't the salvation they had imagined. Eddie's father worked long, grueling hours in the mills, but the money was never enough to escape the struggle. His mother continued to clean houses for others, doing everything she could to support her children. The cold, the exhaustion, and the unrelenting hard work took their toll on the family, but they held on. Canton was part of the larger African-American migration that had begun decades earlier, as black families fled the segregated South in search of opportunities in the North. The promise of better jobs and better treatment drew many like Eddie's family to cities like Canton. But the reality was far more difficult. Though they found work, it didn't shield them from the harsh realities of their new life. In Ohio, just as in Alabama, they were forced to start over, rebuilding their lives with little more than hope. Despite the challenges, Eddie's love for music remained a constant. The church became a refuge, not just a place of worship, but a community where he found solace. It was in the church that Eddie began to understand the true power of his voice. Singing in the church choir, he found a sense of purpose and belonging. The music filled the space, and in those moments, Eddie was able to forget about the cold, the hunger, and the hardships of his everyday life. Music was his escape, his refuge from the world that often felt too big and too unforgiving. But while the church provided comfort, it didn't shield Eddie from the deep hunger he felt. And this hunger was not just for food. It was a hunger for something more, something bigger than survival. Eddie yearned for recognition, for validation, for a chance to prove that he was more than just a boy from a poor family. He had dreams, big ones, and he could feel the stirrings of something deep inside him that was ready to rise. But the road to recognition wasn't paved with ease. It was a road that would require more than just a powerful voice. It would demand every ounce of strength he had. In Canton, Eddie worked whatever jobs he could find. He swept factory floors, loaded boxes, and cleaned tools, doing whatever it took to support himself and help his family. Yet, through it all, his love for music never waned. It was the one thing that gave him a sense of identity, a way to escape the harshness of his everyday life. Music was his lifeline, and every time he sang, he felt closer to his dream. The more he sang, the more he knew that he wasn't just passing time. He was building something, something that would eventually take him beyond the walls of the church and into the world. But the hunger he felt, for food and for recognition, was a constant reminder that his dream was still far from reality. Though the church offered him a space to sing and find his purpose, it wasn't enough to feed the deeper need inside him. Eddie wanted more than just survival. He wanted to be heard. He wanted to make something of himself, to prove that his voice mattered. And that hunger, that burning desire for recognition, would drive him to places he never imagined. Though music was his refuge, it wasn't enough to shield him from the world that still saw him as just another black boy from a poor family. His talent would carry him far, but it would also push him to confront the challenges that lay ahead. The journey was far from over, and Eddie knew that if he was ever going to make it, he would have to keep singing, keep fighting, and keep believing. But could he overcome the hunger for something more than just survival? Would his voice, so powerful and so full of promise, ever be enough to open the doors that had been closed to him for so long? The answer was just around the corner, and it would change everything for Eddie Levert. In Canton, Ohio, where the streets were lined with factories and the air was thick with steel dust, Eddie Levert found the one thing that made him feel alive: his voice. In a town where dreams seemed to rust as quickly as the metal from the mills, Eddie and his friends found solace in music. Music became their salvation, the one thing that allowed them to escape the harshness of their everyday lives and imagine a future beyond the factory walls. Eddie, along with a few close friends, formed a group called the Triumphs. They weren't wealthy or well-connected, and they had no professional equipment to speak of. But they had something more important: a deep love for music and a burning desire to be heard. They would practice in garages, using broomsticks as makeshift microphones, singing under a single flickering light bulb. Their music was raw, unpolished, and filled with the kind of passion that only comes from true struggle. They sang not just for the joy of music, but for the chance to break free from the life that was already set out for them. The early days of the Triumphs were filled with uncertainty, but they never stopped creating. Despite having no money or equipment, they were determined to make music. Their songs were born from the hardships they faced: hunger, rejection, and the desperate desire for something more. Even though they had little, they still managed to make something beautiful, something worth listening to. They wrote songs on scraps of paper, using whatever they had to capture their voices. The music wasn't just a hobby for them, it was a lifeline. As they continued to sing and write, the Triumphs eventually changed their name to the Mascots. They were still unknown, but they were determined to keep pushing forward. They sent demo tapes to every label they could find, hoping for a break. But the industry wasn't kind to young, unknown talent. They faced rejection after rejection, and the emotional toll began to weigh heavily on Eddie and his friends. Each letter that came back marked "no" felt like a door slammed in their faces. It wasn't just a rejection of their music. It felt like a rejection of everything they had worked so hard for, everything they had believed in. Despite the setbacks, Eddie and the band refused to give up. The road to success was never easy, and the emotional cost of constant rejection began to take its toll. But they continued to work, continued to write, and continued to perform in small venues where they barely made enough money to eat. They would drive long hours in a rusted-out car, going from one small gig to the next, hoping for a chance to be noticed. Each performance was an act of defiance against the world that seemed to have forgotten them. They were determined to make their voices heard, no matter the cost. The rejection didn't just come from the labels, it came from society as well. Their music, their sound, their very existence was often deemed too rough, too southern, and too black by the people who controlled the industry. These early struggles took a toll on Eddie's spirit, but they also fueled his drive. With each "no," he grew more determined to prove that he was worthy of a chance. His voice was powerful enough to shake the world, and he wasn't going to let anyone tell him otherwise. But the road was long, and the band was starting to feel the weight of their years of struggle. The constant disappointment began to make Eddie question whether their dreams were ever going to come true. Would they ever find the break they so desperately needed? Would the world ever listen to their music? Or would they be just another forgotten group, lost in the dust of the factory town that birthed them? Even in the face of all this, Eddie and his friends never gave up. They knew that they had something special, something that no amount of rejection could take away from them. But they also knew that the battle wasn't over. They were still fighting for the chance to be seen, to be heard, and to prove that their music mattered. Would they ever get the chance they so longed for? Or would they remain just another group of talented, struggling musicians in a world that didn't seem to care? Despite the endless rejection, they continued to dream, continued to sing, and continued to believe. And their belief would soon be tested, as the break they had been waiting for was just around the corner. But would it be enough? Would it be the chance that would change their lives forever? The answer was coming soon, and it would change everything for Eddie and his band. After years of struggle, rejection, and working jobs that barely kept food on the table, Eddie Levert and his bandmates were about to experience a turning point that would change their lives forever. They had been known as the Triumphs, and later, the Mascots. But in 1963, they would become the OJs. The name change was more than just a new title. It marked the beginning of their rise from the shadows of obscurity into the bright lights of fame. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about survival. They had fought for so long to be heard, and now they were on the verge of a breakthrough. The OJ's journey to success truly began when they signed with King Records in Cincinnati. For years, they had struggled to make it, facing rejection at every turn. But King Records offered them their first real opportunity to be heard. Their first recorded track, Lonely Drifter, wasn't an instant hit, but it was a start. It gave the band a taste of what success could feel like, and for the first time, they began to believe that their dreams were within reach. They had made it into the recording studio, and that was a victory in itself. But they knew this was just the beginning. However, being a black group in the 1960 seconds music scene came with its own set of challenges. The racial barriers of the time were still very much present, and the music industry was no different. Black artists, particularly those in soul music, were often overlooked, dismissed, or pigeonholed. It was hard enough to get a foot in the door. And once you were inside, it was a constant battle to stay relevant. The OJs faced these challenges head-on. They were determined to carve their own space in the music world, but the road ahead was filled with obstacles. As the OJs' reputation began to grow, so did the recognition of their raw talent. They soon found themselves making a major shift in their career. The move to Philadelphia International Records was the catalyst they needed to take their music to the next level. Under the guidance of Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, the OJs were able to record music that wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. The sound they created with Philadelphia International Records was revolutionary. It blended soul, rhythm, and a touch of funk, setting the stage for a new era in music. Their breakthrough came in 1972 with the release of Backstabbers. The song wasn't just a hit, it was an anthem. It captured the essence of the time, blending catchy rhythms with meaningful lyrics about betrayal and trust. Backstabbers was the beginning of the OJ's rise to the top of the soul music scene. It became a massive hit, reaching the charts and becoming a staple on the airwaves. It was a declaration that the OJs were no longer just a band, they were icons in the making. But it wasn't just Backstabbers that cemented their place in music history. In 1973, they released Love Train, which became a worldwide sensation. The song captured the spirit of unity, hope, and love, resonating deeply with people around the globe. The OJs were no longer just a soul group, they were a voice for a generation. The song's infectious groove and uplifting message made it an instant classic, and it skyrocketed the OJs to international fame. It wasn't just a hit in the United States, it became a global anthem, a song that transcended race, culture, and borders. With the release of Love Train, the OJs were no longer struggling to survive, they were living their dream. They had broken through to the mainstream, and their music was being celebrated by people from all walks of life. The OJs had become icons in the soul music scene, and their sound was shaping the future of R&B music. Their success was proof that survival wasn't just about getting by. It was about pushing through the obstacles and making something lasting, something that would leave an impact long after the music stopped. But as their success grew, so did the pressure. The fame, the money, the recognition, it all came with a cost. The OJs were no longer just a group of friends making music in garages. They were now global stars, expected to deliver hit after hit and keep up with the demands of the music industry. The constant pressure to perform, to meet expectations, to stay relevant, began to weigh on Eddie and his bandmates. They were living the dream, but it was a dream that came with its own set of challenges. Could they maintain their success, or would the fame consume them? It was a question that loomed over the OJs as they navigated their new life in the spotlight. Success brought its own set of struggles, and the road ahead would be even more difficult than they could have ever imagined. Yet, despite the pressure, Eddie's voice soared, carrying the spirit of the OJs and the soul of a generation. Would they be able to keep their dream alive, or would the weight of their newfound fame break them? The answer was yet to come, but for now, the OJs had made it. They had overcome the odds and achieved something few believed was possible. Their journey had just begun, and the world was listening. Success came with a price that Eddie Levert was willing to pay, but one that would prove higher than anyone could have predicted. The OJs, now at the peak of their fame, were performing all over the world, but the toll of their success was beginning to show. Touring, which had once been a dream come true, quickly became a grueling and exhausting reality. The band was on the road for most of the year, performing more than 200 shows annually. The excitement of stepping onto the stage was always there, but the physical and emotional demands of constant touring took their toll. For Eddie, the strain was particularly severe. Singing night after night, sometimes twice a day, was a test of endurance. His voice, which had once been his lifeline, began to wear down. The constant traveling, late nights, and lack of rest made it hard to maintain his health. Eddie's body was beginning to break down under the pressure of the music industry's demands. But despite the physical exhaustion, Eddie pushed forward, knowing that their success relied on their ability to deliver night after night. The world expected them to perform, and Eddie, with his commitment to the music and the band, was determined not to let down the fans who had helped carry them to stardom. But the toll wasn't just physical. The relentless schedule also strained Eddie's personal relationships, particularly with his family. His wife, Martha, and their children were often left behind while Eddie traveled from city to city. The constant separation took its emotional toll on their marriage. Eddie missed birthdays, anniversaries, and special moments that no amount of fame or money could replace. The distance between Eddie and his family grew wider, and the quiet moments of home life began to feel distant and out of reach. Despite his success, Eddie was beginning to feel the loneliness of fame. A loneliness that came from being surrounded by thousands of people every night, but still feeling isolated. Then came the loss that would change everything for Eddie and the OJs. William Powell, one of the founding members of the group, was diagnosed with colon cancer. The news came as a shock to everyone. William had been the voice of reason in the band, the one who kept them grounded during the chaos of their rise to fame. His smooth, disciplined voice had been a key part of the OJs' sound, and his loss would be felt deeply by everyone. Despite his illness, William insisted on continuing to perform, refusing to let his battle with cancer stop him from doing what he loved. He pushed through the pain, unwilling to let his friends down. But in 1977, just a few years after the band's rise to stardom, William Powell passed away at the age of 35. His death was a devastating blow to the OJs. Losing a band member was hard enough, but losing a friend, someone who had been there from the very beginning, was almost too much to bear. For Eddie, the loss of William felt like the foundation of the band was crumbling. The bond they shared went beyond music. They had been through the toughest of times together, supporting each other when no one else believed in them. William's death was a reminder that life didn't stop for fame or success. The music may have kept going, but for Eddie and the rest of the band, their hearts were breaking. The impact of William's death was felt by the entire band. It wasn't just the loss of a friend, it was the loss of a brother. Eddie, who had been through so much already, now had to face the grief of losing someone who had been with him through the darkest moments of his life. The OJs were no longer just a group of musicians. They were a family, and when one of them fell, the entire group felt it. The band struggled to find their way after William's passing, and the emotional toll was evident in their performances. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion of touring that weighed on them, it was the grief and the emotional strain of moving forward without William. Despite the grief, the OJs kept performing. Eddie, ever the professional, pushed through the pain, refusing to let the loss derail their success. He knew that the music had to go on. But the truth was, Eddie's heart was breaking. The pressure of fame, the toll of constant touring, and the weight of personal loss were beginning to take their toll on Eddie in ways that no one could have predicted. The question now was, could the OJs survive their first real loss? Or would the pressure of fame and personal tragedy finally break them? The band kept going, but it wasn't the same. The joy they once felt in performing now carried a deeper sadness. Eddie had always been the driving force behind the group, but with William gone, something important was missing. They were still a band, still performing for their fans, but the road ahead was uncertain. The weight of the loss was heavy on Eddie, and he couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could keep pushing himself and the band forward. Would they be able to carry on? Or would the pressure of everything they had been through finally tear them apart? The journey of the OJs had taken them to great heights, but with each success came the difference, the painful cost of losing those they loved. There are losses that break the heart, and then there are losses that break the soul. Eddie Levert experienced both, enduring the kind of grief no parent should ever have to bear. The first devastating blow came when Eddie lost his eldest son, Gerald Levert, on the 10th of November, 2006. Gerald, a talented artist in his own right, had inherited his father's gift for music, and together they had shared some of their most memorable moments on stage. The bond between them was deep, and the pain Eddie felt when Gerald passed was beyond anything he had ever known. Gerald's death shook Eddie to his core. He wasn't just losing a son, he was losing a part of himself, a reflection of his own struggles, hopes, and dreams. Gerald was only 40 years old, and the manner of his death, a combination of prescription drugs and over-the-counter medication, made the loss all the more tragic. For Eddie, it wasn't just the grief of losing a child, it was the overwhelming weight of watching his son's life come to an end far too soon, with so much still left to give. Gerald had been the one who carried Eddie's legacy into the future, and now he was gone. Eddie's health began to deteriorate in the wake of Gerald's death. The loss affected not just his spirit, but his body as well. The grief was all-consuming. For weeks, Eddie found it hard to function. The public mourning was intense, and the weight of the world seemed to be pressing down on him. But even in the midst of his devastation, Eddie continued to perform. Music had always been his escape, his way of processing pain, and though it was incredibly difficult to continue singing without his son by his side, Eddie did it because he knew that's what Gerald would have wanted. The public mourning was a shared experience, with fans from all over the world offering their condolences. But for Eddie, the real mourning happened in silence. At night, when the lights faded and the crowds, were gone, Eddie was alone with his grief. The weight of it pressed down on him, making everything feel heavier. He couldn't escape it, not even for a moment. But he knew that in the midst of the pain, he had to keep moving forward for Gerald, for his family, and for the music that had carried him through so many of life's storms. As if the loss of Gerald wasn't enough, Eddie had to face another heartbreaking tragedy just 2 years later, in 2008. His second son, Sean Levert, passed away at the age of 39. Sean's death came as a result of a rare lung disease called sarcoidosis, which was complicated by high blood pressure and withdrawal from medication. For Eddie, this loss felt even more intense. He had already been through so much with Gerald's death, and now To lose Sean, another one of his sons, felt like the final blow. Sean had always been the quieter one, the one who avoided the spotlight but had a deep, soulful voice that could melt hearts. Eddie loved both of his sons deeply, but there was something about Sean's gentleness that stood out. He was the one who would often call his father just to check in, just to sit in silence together. The bond between father and son was unmistakable, and Sean's passing left a hole in Eddie's heart that would never be filled. In the wake of Sean's death, Eddie and the family came together to cope with the pain. They leaned on each other for support, as they had done throughout their lives. Despite the immense grief, Eddie knew that he had to remain strong for his family. Losing two sons in such a short period of time was more than any parent should have to endure, but Eddie found solace in the fact that he still had his family, his friends, and the music. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was enough to keep him moving forward. The loss of his sons weighed heavily on Eddie, but he refused to let it consume him. Even in the darkest moments, he found strength in his music and in the love of his remaining family members. But despite his strength, Eddie knew that the storms he had weathered were far from over. The grief had not finished with him. The pain of losing his children never truly left Eddie. It lingered in the quiet moments when he found himself thinking of them, wondering what could have been. Every time he stepped on stage, every time he sang, there was a part of him that was still missing. And though he continued to perform, it was clear that he was singing not just for his fans, but for his sons as well. Music had always been his refuge, but it had never been enough to take away the emptiness that followed the loss of his children. Eddie's journey of grief was far from over. He had learned to live with it, to carry it with him every day, but it had become a part of him in a way that nothing else ever had. And as he continued to sing, Eddie knew that the music was his way of keeping his sons alive, of honoring their memory and the legacy they had left behind. But the question remained, could Eddie continue to bear the weight of such unimaginable loss, or would it eventually overwhelm him? The answer would come in time, but for now, Eddie pressed on, singing through the pain, carrying his son's spirits with him every step of the way. After enduring so many storms, Eddie Levert's life seemed to be taking a turn for the better. For years, his heart had been broken by grief, and his spirit weighed down by loss. The tragic deaths of his sons, Gerald and Sean, left scars that no amount of fame or success could heal. But just when Eddie thought peace was beyond his reach, fate brought someone into his life who would change everything. Raquel, Captain. Eddie met Raquel at a time when his world was still heavy with grief. After losing his children, he had felt isolated, adrift in a sea of sorrow. But Raquel's calming presence was like a balm for his wounded soul. Their relationship began quietly, with a deep connection that neither of them could ignore. Raquel wasn't just a partner. She became Eddie's anchor in a world that had often felt unsteady. Where the loud applause of his fans had once filled the emptiness, it was now the quiet, steady support of Raquel that brought him peace. Raquel's influence on Eddie was nothing short of transformative. She had an innate ability to bring calm into the chaos that had surrounded him for so long. With Raquel by his side, Eddie found a sense of stability he hadn't felt in years. She wasn't interested in the fame or the spotlight. She was focused on Eddie as a person, not a celebrity. In many ways, she became the rock he needed to help him rebuild his life. Raquel gave him the space to heal, allowing him to process his grief without the constant pressure of being on for others. She offered him the kind of love that didn't demand anything in return, the kind of love that simply allowed him to breathe. Their relationship blossomed, and soon Eddie's life began to shift in a direction he never thought possible. In 2002, they welcomed their daughter, Ryan, into the world. Ryan's birth was a beacon of hope, a symbol of new beginnings. Eddie had always dreamed of being a father, but after losing so much, he had almost given up on the idea of finding peace. Ryan brought with her a fresh sense of joy and purpose. Eddie found himself more present, more engaged, and more hopeful about the future than he had ever been before. With Raquel and Ryan, Eddie began to understand that life could still hold beauty, even after so much loss. Raquel and Eddie's family life was built on love, faith, and support. They created a home filled with laughter and warmth, something Eddie hadn't known in years. Raquel made sure their home was a sanctuary from the world, a place where Eddie could let go of his burdens and simply enjoy being a father and a husband. She encouraged him to find joy in the simple things: morning coffee, quiet evenings, spending time with their daughter. For Eddie, this was a new chapter, one where he could focus on the things that mattered most: his family, his healing, and his peace. Eddie's life had changed in ways he never thought possible, and for the first time in many years, he felt like he could breathe again. Raquel had given him a new sense of hope and purpose. She had shown him that even after the storms, peace was possible, even if it wasn't found in the way he expected. His life, once filled with constant turmoil, was now defined by love, stability, and the joy of being a father to Ryan. But just when Eddie thought he had found the calm he had longed for, fate threw yet another challenge his way, a challenge no father should ever have to face. It was a reminder that life, no matter how peaceful it seemed, still had its share of trials to endure. Eddie's story of grief, healing, and love was far from over. This new challenge would test Eddie's strength in ways he had never imagined, and just as he had learned to heal, he would soon find himself facing another storm. Would the peace he had found with Raquel and their family be enough to see him through yet another heartbreak? The answer was still to come, but Eddie's journey had taught him one important lesson. No matter how difficult life gets, love and resilience will always carry you through. Just when Eddie Levert thought he had begun to rebuild his life, the universe delivered its most cruel blow. Eddie, who had already faced unimaginable grief in losing his sons, was dealt another devastating loss: his beloved daughter, Ryan. Ryan had brought light and joy into Eddie's world, at a time when he had thought happiness was forever out of reach. Born in 2002, she was the miracle Eddie never expected, a spark of laughter in a life filled with sorrow. With her birth, Eddie had experienced the kind of joy that can only come from witnessing the growth of a child. Ryan became his reason to smile, the reason to keep moving forward, and the one thing that gave him hope in the darkest of times. Their bond was strong and undeniable. Eddie would talk about Ryan with a tenderness in his voice that revealed the depth of his love for her. She had a way of making him feel young again, reminding him that life could still be beautiful, even after the loss of his two sons. Ryan wasn't just Eddie's daughter, she was his second chance at joy, the living proof that life could still offer sweetness despite the bitterness of past heartbreak. However, in 2019, Eddie's world was once again shattered when Ryan began to experience health issues. It started with exhaustion, the kind that no amount of sleep could cure. Her hands would ache, and her skin bruised easily. As a parent, Eddie could feel the worry building inside him. The joy he had found in Ryan's laughter now began to be clouded by the fear of losing her. After a series of tests, doctors finally diagnosed Ryan with lupus, a chronic, autoimmune disease that causes the body's immune system to attack its own tissues. The news was a crushing blow to Eddie and Raquel. Ryan, still so young and full of life, was facing a battle that no child should have to endure. Eddie's heart broke as he watched his daughter fight through the pain. He had already lost so much, and now he was faced with the possibility of losing the one thing that had helped him find hope again. But this time, Eddie wasn't alone in his battle. Raquel stood by him, offering the support and strength they both needed to cope with Ryan's illness. Eddie became her constant companion, never leaving her side, offering words of comfort and love, and doing everything he could to make her feel safe. Ryan's courage was a source of inspiration for Eddie, but it was also a constant reminder of how fragile life can be. As Ryan's condition worsened, Eddie continued to sing. But now, it was not just for the crowd, it was for his daughter. Music had always been his refuge. But now it became a lifeline in a world that felt too heavy to bear. Every note he sang was filled with the hope that his daughter would pull through, that the strength she showed would be enough to overcome her illness. But despite his faith, Ryan's health continued to deteriorate. The hospital visits, the treatments, the constant worry, it took a toll on Eddie and his family. In December 2024, Ryan's battle came to an end. Eddie was there, holding her hand, whispering prayers into the sterile air of the hospital room. He kissed her forehead and told her that it was okay to rest now. His little girl, the miracle he had never expected, was gone. Eddie had lost everything once again: his beloved daughter, his reason to smile, and the joy that had kept him going for so long. The funeral was a painful moment for Eddie and his family. Ryan's passing left a hole in their hearts that would never be filled. The grief was overwhelming. Eddie stood at the front, unable to speak the words that his heart so desperately wanted to say. There was no way to express the depth of his loss, no way to make sense of the world that had taken his daughter away. All he could do was stand there in silence, holding on to the memories of the little girl who had filled his life with laughter and love. Ryan's death was not just another tragedy for Eddie. It was the end of the hope that had begun to heal his broken heart. The pain of losing her was sharper than any he had felt before. Eddie had already buried 2 sons, but now he had to bury his daughter, the one who had given him the most hope. The grief was consuming, and Eddie wasn't sure how he would survive it. How do you keep going when you've lost everything? How do you find the strength to live when the one thing that made you feel whole is gone? In the days that followed Ryan's death, Eddie and Raquel struggled to make sense of it all. The house, once filled with the sound of Ryan's laughter, was now silent. Eddie found himself wandering through the rooms, looking for the echoes of her voice. He missed the way she would call him Daddy, and the way she would make him laugh when everything else seemed so heavy. But now, all that was left were memories and a broken heart. Yet, even in the darkest moment, the music kept calling. Eddie couldn't escape it. He had always turned to music in times of sorrow, and now, more than ever, he needed it to help him through the unbearable pain. The question remained: would Eddie be able to sing again? Could he find the strength to lift his voice in a world that had taken so much from him? The answer was still uncertain. But as he had done so many times before, Eddie would find a way to keep going, to keep singing through the pain, because the music was the only thing that could carry him through the darkness. With Ryan's death, Eddie had lost everything, but in the silence of his grief, the music still called to him. Would he be able to answer that call, or would the weight of his loss be too much to bear? Only time would tell, but for now, Eddie knew one thing for sure: he had loved deeply, and that love would never be silenced. The losses Eddie Levert endured were more than anyone should ever have to bear. Yet, through it all, he stands strong, his voice still echoing across the world. His story isn't over, it's still being written in every note he sings. After the devastating losses of his children, Eddie faced an emotional battle that most would have found insurmountable. Yet, in his darkest moments, he found a way to return to the stage, where his voice once again became his refuge. Eddie's return to performing after the death of his children was nothing short of remarkable. Music had always been his escape, his way of dealing with grief, and it became his lifeline once more. Even after losing so much, Eddie didn't walk away from the one thing that had given him purpose. He knew that, even in his pain, his music still had the power to connect with others. The crowds, who had cheered for him for decades, became a source of strength for Eddie. They didn't just appreciate his voice, they respected his resilience. When Eddie took the stage, it wasn't just a performance, it was a testament to his enduring spirit. Each song he sang carried the weight of his personal story, and the audience could feel that. His voice became a bridge between his pain and their empathy. As Eddie sang, the emotional power of his performances was undeniable. The crowd's reaction to him was more than just applause. It was a shared moment of healing. In every note, Eddie poured out the years of loss, love, and perseverance he had lived through. The audience didn't just hear the music, they felt it in their bones. They knew that they weren't just witnessing a man sing, they were watching a living legend continue to rise above life's greatest challenges. Every performance became an act of defiance against the grief that had nearly consumed him. And with each song, Eddie reminded himself and his fans that his story wasn't over. Today, Eddie's life is different, but his legacy is as strong as ever. He now divides his time between Las Vegas and his hometown of Canton, Ohio. In Las Vegas, Eddie lives a quieter life, a life that reflects the changes he's undergone over the years. He lives with his wife, Raquel, and their daughter, Ryan, the same child who brought joy back into his life after so much loss. In the stillness of his home, surrounded by family, Eddie finds peace. The music still calls to him, but his life now has more balance. It's no longer consumed by the pressures of the stage. He's found comfort in the small, everyday moments: morning coffee with Raquel, watching his daughter grow, and cherishing the time he has with the ones he loves. But Eddie's legacy doesn't just live in the music he made. It lives on through the foundation he created in. Ryan's name, dedicated to helping those who struggle with lupus, the disease that took her life. Eddie's contributions to the lupus community are a continuation of his commitment to giving back. Despite all the pain he's endured, Eddie has chosen to honor Ryan's memory by helping others. The Foundation's work has become another way for him to keep her spirit alive, to ensure that her fight continues to have meaning. Eddie's music may have lifted millions, but his heart now beats for something deeper, leaving a lasting impact on the world beyond the stage. As Eddie's voice continues to resonate across the world, one question remains: what is the price of greatness? The world has witnessed Eddie's rise to fame, his triumphs, and his personal battles. His legacy as a soul icon is cemented, but the true cost of his success is something only he fully understands. His journey has been filled with sacrifices, painful losses, personal struggles, and the constant push to stay relevant in an ever-changing world. As Eddie stands on stage, singing with the same passion and fire he had when he first began, he knows that greatness is not just about the applause or the records, it's about the price you pay along the way, the lessons learned, and the love that carries you through the darkest moments. Eddie Levert's story isn't just one of fame and fortune. It's a story of resilience, of rising time and time again despite the losses that would break most people. His music lives on, and so does his legacy. He continues to sing through the pain, to share his story with the world, and to honor the memory of those he has lost. But as he looks back on his journey, Eddie knows that the true measure of greatness is not just in the records or the accolades. It's in the strength to continue, to keep moving forward, and to make a difference in the lives of others. And Eddie, with his powerful voice and his unshakable spirit, has done just that. Eddie Levert's The Journey is a testament to the power of survival and the strength of the human spirit. His life and career have been shaped by incredible loss, but also by his unwavering resilience. From his humble beginnings in Bessemer, Alabama, to becoming a global soul music icon, Eddie's voice became a bridge between the pain he endured and the joy he shared with the world. Through every note, he not only sang songs of heartache and joy, but also embodied the strength of survival, proving that greatness isn't measured by how high you climb, but by how deeply you survive. Eddie's impact on music is immeasurable. His voice, raw and powerful, became the heartbeat of the OJs and a defining sound in soul music. Songs like Love Train, Backstabbers, and For the Love of Money are anthems that still resonate today, not just for their catchy melodies, but for the soul they carry. His music transcended time, speaking to people of all ages and backgrounds, a testament to the universal language of and his voice. Eddie's legacy isn't just about his chart-topping hits, it's about the way he made people feel through his music. His voice became a symbol of perseverance, a reminder that, no matter the obstacles, the song must go on. But Eddie's resilience goes beyond his music. The loss of his children, the pain of personal grief, and the weight of fame never stopped him. Instead, they shaped him, giving his performances a depth and authenticity that few could match. Even after the hardest of losses, Eddie continued to perform, using music as his way of healing and sharing his journey with the world. His ability to continue singing, despite the pain, is a testament to his strength. His music became not only a way to survive, but a way to honor the memory of those he had lost. As Eddie reflects on his life and career, it's clear that his story is one of unwavering determination and a deep love for the art of music. His legacy will live on not only in the records he made, but in the hearts of those who were touched by his voice. Eddie's ability to persevere, to continue to rise after every fall, is a lesson for all of us. He showed the world that greatness isn't about avoiding hardship, but about facing it with grace, dignity, and a relentless passion for life. Even as Eddie's career continues to inspire new generations, his influence reaches beyond the stage. His foundation, his commitment to family, and his unshakable belief in the power of love and music are the true markers of his legacy. His journey, though filled with pain, has also been a journey of healing, growth, and love. Eddie Levert's story teaches us that even in the darkest moments, there is always a way to keep singing, to keep living, and to keep moving forward. The love train may one day stop, but Eddie's music, his resilience, and his spirit will live on. The song may end, but the love train will always run on. Eddie Levert has not only shaped the sound of soul music, he has shaped the way we view strength, survival, and the power of music to heal. His journey is a life well sung, and his legacy will continue to inspire and touch hearts around the world for generations to come.